going to be a good conversation, I think.
So, Melody, my first question to you, because I'm also an author, is what does it feel like to know that 7 million people or over 7 million people have read your book?
It's pretty astounding.
Yeah. Does that make you want to just say, okay, I don't have to do anything else in the world.
For
I'm
the rest
done.
of my life.
I have made my dent. I'm done.
No, when I start working and start being creative, it just goes on and on.
Yeah.
Because then I get another idea and I think, oh, and it takes me about 5 years to develop an idea once I get it. So that means I have to live with that idea, mush it around in my head. I mean, I become bedmates with that idea until I really get it. So I don't think I'll ever get tired of writing. No.
Yeah. So, we both have many questions for you. I'll let you, because I don't want to hog this. I know that your book and you have become foundational, and yeah, what do you have?
I have so many questions, but I really am just like, I have to say first and foremost for anybody listening, I'm a huge fan. When John said that you reached out to be on his podcast, I was like, I'm coming on this episode. Like, I'm like gonna fangirl out because in the last, I would actually say, few years. I mean, I started my own codependency journey when I was about 25 in Al-Anon and therapy. Mm-hmm. But in the last probably 2 to 3 years, it's really been the kind of flag that I fly in my therapy work. I teach classes around it. I talk about it all the time. And your book is really foundational. It's the one that, most therapists recommend.
Well, I know. And, that was my intention when I wrote it.
Yeah.
I got thrust into this whole codependency thing before we even knew the word. Mm-hmm. And yet I could tell something was fundamentally wrong with relationships.
Will you actually tell us a little about that? So for those who don't know you, like I know you, like I'm like I said, a fangirl. Can you let us know like how you came to be, I guess what most people would look at you as like a codependency expert, even though you're not necessarily a therapist. It's like the kind of realm that you really, I don't even know, you created a dialogue for so many people.
I created a label. A label with different subcategories that I found absolutely essential to my own recovery. Until I find out what works on me, I don't know. I don't have a clue what might work on other people. Mm-hmm. And I got thrown into this codependency thing, kicking and screaming. Mm-hmm. I had just been through treatment for my own chemical dependency. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to work with other addicts and alcoholics. I wanted to help them. I wanted to share what I had with them. But then we have to put the women's movement into this perspective too. This was back in Minnesota in the mid 70s, very Catholic state. If you knew 2 women that were divorced back then, you were exceptional. Women didn't get divorced. If they did get divorced, they led miserable, alienated lives.
Yeah.
Except for my mother, who I think if she was born in today's world, she would be a lesbian.
Right.
I think I could say that about a lot of women I know from that time for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. She just, she was also a pathological liar. So I'm not sure if this is true or not, but she claims to be the first woman in the state that was able to get a mortgage in her own name. Because up till then, women were looked at as chattel. The men, if the men could earn the money, then the women didn't need to worry. So that's just for background. It was such a strange way of living. The patriarchy was strong.
Yeah.
If a man spoke, everyone nodded. If a woman spoke, no one heard.
Right.
So let's go back to me getting out of treatment. I went to work in a chemical dependency facility. I was happy to get any job I could. And of course, they wanted me to start as a secretary.
Of course.
And I was in college at that time studying chemical dependency counseling. And all they told me there was, if you're dealing with the family of the alcoholics, just listen and nod and say, I understand. Well, that could go on indefinitely with
Uh-huh.
codependency. You know, it could just be this big loop. So I show up for work and I'm happy to do my secretarial work. And then the woman that ran the center, her and her husband started it along with my husband's relatives. He and his two brothers started most of the treatment facilities in Minnesota, not Hazelton, but, you know, the down and out for the normal people, the regular people. And so my husband pulls me aside one day and he says, there's been a change of plans. If we want to keep our funding, we have to do something for the families. And we've decided you're going to do it. I said, I don't know what to do with them. I'm new here. I mean, I had these visions of working with my mother, and it just didn't, nothing about it excited me. And they said, well, you're new here. That's why you get the job. So they threw me in, and these were women that one woman died of old age. She was under 30. Her husband had been sent to jail. They had like 7 kids, and he had been sent to prison for the, I mean, these were hardcore codependents.
Right.
That would hang on and on and on. And so I was thrown into this group of all different versions of my mother. And I didn't know what to do with them. I didn't have a clue what to do with them. Nothing I had learned in college helped me to do any kind of therapy with them. But as I listened, I also began to hear the pain inside me. Because my husband, that was a program director, he's passed now, so I'm not hurting him, who was program director and one of the true big wigs. He was in the paper all the time. He was getting people out of prison to use treatment as an alternative. You know, he was a big wig. He was also still a practicing alcoholic. And I couldn't go sit in a group and say, yeah, we all got something we need to talk about. So I started picking everyone's brains. I started reading everything I could. And then I also started looking within too, because that's the missing link when you're helping people, isn't it? Looking within ourselves.
Yep.
And after about 3 or 4 years of this, and to see a difference in the people I was working with. Like they got it. They could let go and not be abandoning anyone. They got what it meant a little bit to love ourselves. Although my own journey with self-love has been a very long, arduous one. I talked about self-love back in the 70s, but it was with a bit of skepticism. It's like, well, how much can we do that? How much is right? And what does it mean? What does it even mean to love myself? Right. But we started trying, and there was a fire going on in the 70s back in Minnesota. Young people were getting into AA, and my work, I believe, helped young people also get into Al-Anon, although that was still a little bit rigid back in those days. But it was a start. I mean, we have to start somewhere. And it was the start of understanding what it meant to be codependent and this extreme role it plays in our lives and our relationships. I mean, it's such a deadly, insidious thing, this not loving ourselves and loving other people. It just, creates all sorts of problems, doesn't it?
How does it feel, I guess, to see where we're at now, right? I mean, you kind of created this momentum, you kind of dropped this amazing bomb, and now here we are, however many, 40, 50 years? I don't know, I'm bad at math, years later.
I feel like we've accomplished proof of concept.
Yeah, right. That's a good way to put it.
38 years, I believe, since your book came out, no?
89,
yeah, 36, 38, I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, which is basically about as...
That's my age. I mean, I'm 38.
Yeah, about as old as Vanessa. Can I ask you this for people who don't know and listening? What is your definition of codependency? Because it's complicated.
It is very complicated.
Or maybe it's not.
I don't like to be technical. I use my short form. It's people who love others more than they love themselves to their and the other person's detriment. Or other people who feel more responsible for other people than they feel for themselves to their and their partner's detriment. It's just this lack of relationship with ourselves.
Yeah.
And it permeates everything we do.
Right.
So
Unless
can I
we're
ask
tending.
you, with your story, how did that happen? Meaning, how much of that was environmental? How much of that was, your upbringing? How much of that was who you chose to love? How does one become codependent?
That codependent. Most, not all, but most people with codependency issues lived with alcoholism as a child. Someone in their environment was not acting appropriately, and the whole family tended to structure around the diseased person's disease. And everything we learn by age 7 becomes our life skills. So I see many, not all people with codependency issues, but many of them came from an alcoholic family. I've also seen raving codependents who had beautiful families. So I don't, it's a very normal human thing. And we also need to look at our society right now too. And we have so many nutters. We do.
To put it bluntly.
Running around. I mean, you have to be careful who you engage with and how you engage, and that you don't get sucked into someone else's insanity. It's being alive at this time is very exciting, and it's also very challenging. And I'm coming to learn that the reason we were introduced to all these skills, these great recovery skills and recovery tools, and this map to knowing ourselves better, is because we're going to need them. And we're going to need to use them, because this is a crazy time in our evolution. It's just very crazy.
Yeah, I love how you simplify it to say when you love somebody more than you love yourself. I always say one of the tenets of codependency is a lack of relationship with self, right? And how that manifests. And a lot of times the way that I'll talk about it is, to your point, people who grew up with alcoholism in their family, but really anybody who grows up with a caretaker who is essentially incapable of putting that child's needs first, right? So whether that person has mental illness, whether that person has an addiction, whether that person is a narcissist, right? Anybody who as a parent can't see outside themselves, basically is pretty much priming that child to basically do the same, right? To only see the other.
For ignoring themselves, never paying attention to themselves, and this total focus on others. And that, I mean, with women particularly, that was the way it went.
That's what it meant to be a woman, right?
Right. You had to, and you couldn't offend anyone, because God knows you needed a man to take care of you, because how else were you going to survive? And this evolution, this evolutionary process of humans, we like to think that it happens in big bang moments and then we're all cured or we're all new, but it's not. It's a very organic, little by slowly process of each of us making the best difference we can in our own lives first, and then sharing that with others, sharing any gift they have, any light they have with others to help them. That makes me curious too. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course.
What are life coaches?
It's a new thing.
That's a great question.
Yeah. Vanessa and I are both clinically trained, so we're therapists, but I also call myself a coach because, with the board, there's a lot of, at least for me, after going to therapy school, I wanted to work in a way that felt more honest to me. So I called myself a coach because in the coaching world, there's no board. And so you can do things like, meet people at coffee shops. And I started to make house calls on my motorcycle. I brought people into the gym, and I started to work in kind of unconventional ways, ways that a therapist, wasn't supposed to work. And I have this kind of mad scientist part about me that always likes to kind of color outside the lines and experiment. So for me, that's why I call myself a coach, so I could do things like that. But of course, in the last 10 years, I think because of social media, coaching has exploded because of people coming over from like yoga, fitness, addiction. And instead of going to therapy school, because not everyone wants to be a therapist, they could, get certified as a coach, and it's just a quicker way to help people.
And maybe have a niche, right? Like to your point,
niche.
if somebody comes from fitness, they might specifically work with somebody with their nutrition and their physical lifestyle as a coach. Instead of obviously as a psychotherapist where you're trained to kind of go deeper.
Yeah. And I think now there's probably a lot of codependency coaches who specialize in codependency.
Yeah, this whole life coaching thing is new to me. I mean, we didn't have it, but then the computer has made it possible, hasn't it? I mean, the computer is integrally connected to life coaching. It's changed our world.
Yeah, I also think it's connected to this change that you were talking about that's happening right in our world. I mean, without the computer, without social media, like for example, we wouldn't know what was going on in Iran right now, right? And the incredible,
I know, you feel like you've died if you can't find your phone. It's like, oh, I must be dead.
Right. Yeah. Well, now we're all addicts at this point. Let's be real.
Yeah. No, we're looped in. The hard thing about the phones and this World Wide Web is I believe it connects our own nervous systems and our electrical energy to everyone else's out there. So if we've got any degree of anxiety or uncertainty, chances are it could easily be escalated unless we keep a fairly strong grip on ourselves.
Yes, it's become, I know for me, I don't know if you know what TikTok is, but when I scroll through, I feel my nervous system being activated because you're watching very graphic things like people fighting or getting scared or animals being eaten. And
this is what you're watching on TikTok. To be clear, I'm not watching this.
Yeah.
I'm watching puppies and babies.
But it's because if you click on a couple things, suddenly it rains that and then
you're bombarded with it. You're bombarded with crazy.
Yeah.
Right. And I have to kind of hide my phone because sometimes, women in bikinis and half naked people. But anyway, it's like the news. It's like it's like watching the news 24/7, and now it's just on our phones. And I think, definitely activates our nervous system.
I have a rule, Melanie, that I don't go on my phone. I don't go on social media for a minimum of 1 hour after I wake up. So I don't care what's happening. I don't care what I need to do. It can all wait. We have a toddler. So I like the mornings. They're quiet. It's still dark slightly. I can be with my toddler. And I don't want other people getting into my nervous system. It's almost like getting hijacked.
Yeah,
right?
it is. It is getting hijacked.
Yeah. Yes. Right. Yeah.
So Melanie, going back to... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
What would you tell people looking for a life coach? How do they know if they've got someone they can trust, that's reliable, that's going to give them sound information?
Yeah, I think this is where I think social media can be helpful because if you follow their feed, you get a good sense of who they are. So back in the day, it was just letters after your name or a resume you read, but now you actually have a direct conduit into someone's life. So anyone who follows my feed on social media will get to know, oh, this is how he is. He's either for me or he's not, right? So I think that's very powerful with the internet is it is a direct conduit into people's life if they're active on social. So I think that's the best way. That and of course word of mouth.
Yeah, word of mouth.
Yeah, that's usually the best way.
Well, yeah,
and someone now, who is great for your friend may not be great for you.
Right.
Yeah, and now they have, one of the few things I like about this whole internet explosion is our ability to rate people poorly if we feel they've truly let us down, which can be helpful. We had no way of knowing that information before. It can also be something used against us, but
it's definitely a check and balances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, thank you for answering that question because I still don't feel like I really understand life coaches, but I'm more open to them. Some of them are absolutely lovely.
I think a lot of it, Melody, is like as a culture, I think we are finally and listen, there's bad coaches, there's also bad therapists, right? There's
absolutely.
You can find negative in any of it. But I think as a culture, what we're finally starting to do, going back to what you were saying about like when the patriarchy was strong, this idea of the therapist, kind of the old Freudian way of like, they're the expert, you're the client, they're completely blank. They tell nothing about themselves. You are beholden to them. Like that is a very patriarchal way of having treatment. Right. And so it feels a little bit like this idea of the rise of the feminine. I mean, this collective way of healing, this collective, like, let me share myself with you and my struggles with you, and I'll hold your hand, you know, while you go through it. To me, it feels a lot like we're shifting more into, I would say, how we're meant to heal, really, right? Which is in group. I mean, it's with each other. It's not like one person.
It's in relationship.
Right.
It's in
exactly.
relationship.
Exactly.
Whereas in the patriarchy, it was a little, you know, your therapist is up on a pedestal and then you're down there. And I've never agreed with those kind of non-reciprocal, non-equal relationships.
Yeah. How did you start recovering from codependency? So once you were aware that this was a big problem and a theme in your life, how did you start recovering from that?
Well, first I had to find out what it was besides a word I didn't understand that I was recovering from. I had to figure out what the behaviors that I was doing that kept sabotaging me were. So luckily by then I was working in a couple of different treatment centers. So I was able to pull the good therapists aside and say, hey, what, and after enough picking around, I began to get some answers. I began to understand rescuing. I began to understand caretaking, the behaviors that will create huge resentments in us if we let them. It took 5 years. It took me 5 years of research on this, of going inside, of looking at other people, and in order to write that book. And I also used a lot of books in that. Then once we get this all sorted, you know, okay, I'm codependent. I might need help. Where do I start? Where it hurts. Start where it hurts. Start where it hurts. We're not all going to have the same relationship with codependency and with our relationships. So if we can find the point of anguish, we can start working there to free ourselves from it. I love that one podcast you advertised. I think it was you about this is your fault, something like that. The old, it's not me, it's you. It's not me, it's him.
That's our book, actually.
Yeah. That's actually our book. Yeah. But start where it hurts. That's a powerful sentence.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and you spoke to resentment. So I talk a lot about resentment, obviously, when doing my codependency work with people. And I like to use resentment as almost like the flag or like the barometer, especially when you're new on this journey. In my experience personally, but also working with clients, we don't really have a good understanding of our internal landscape, right? We've been so focused on the external that we don't even know, like, how am I feeling, right? What is my passion?
Or do I have a resentment? Yeah. Exactly. Because I've felt that resentful way for 20 years.
Right. That we know, right? Like, we know that well. And I always say that, I'm like, you might not know what your passion is, but I bet you know what resentment feels like, right? And you know it well. And so I have people almost as like a introductory kind of homework assignment to start really paying attention to the feeling of resentment. It's almost like their jumping off point to, like, where is your codependency showing up, right? I'd be curious to know what you think about that, because I also know you talk a lot about, like, the difference between anger and resentment. And I know you say this in your book, and a lot of people ask me that question too, like, what's the difference, right?
Well, I think anger is the original resentment, and then when we don't deal with it, it turns into a resentment. When we can't say no to someone, so we keep saying yes for 5 years, we build up a resentment. There's so much fear in so many of us about just saying, I don't like that. That doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
And just acknowledging and accepting a feeling is really all we need to do with it, isn't it? We don't need a marching band. We don't need a big show. We don't even necessarily need to tell anyone except ourselves. It's back to that relationship with ourselves. I'm feeling resentful. Why? Well, because I don't like doing this all the time. Well, have you ever told the other person, no, I just keep doing it? Well, then stop doing it. And we don't need to say, well, I'm setting a boundary with you because you're a big asshole. You know, we could just say, no, I'm not doing that.
Right.
we've really talked our way into this spot as codependents, as people with codependency issues. We teach people how to treat us. And then we get mad when they do what we've taught them.
Yep. So true.
Do you think, I grew up with an alcoholic father and my parents never being at home because when they came to America, they were just in survival mode, right? So they couldn't speak their language and they're out, working, 18 hours a day. And so the kids were left at home. And so do you think that that can set you up for codependency, meaning just parents, loving parents, but just never around?
I know it did with me.
Yeah.
I never had that sense of a safe home with myself. Just when I was all alone, thinking, I'm good, I'm safe, I'm at home with myself. And then we can start easily running around looking for home with someone else because we don't feel like we have that safe, secure home with ourselves because we've been in a big building all alone for 18 years. Yeah. So to me, what? Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, how much of that is normal in that when you're growing up, the idea of a safe tree, the idea of a safe home or connection to self isn't even formed yet because you're 7 or you're 9, you're making friends. You don't have no sense of, even in high school, we're just sponges.
But parents, ideally your parents actually mirror and provide that safe home.
That attachment.
And so it's just like our nervous systems, right? So before children's nervous systems are developed, as the adults, we are basically a conduit for them. So their nervous system is essentially our nervous system. So until you are at the age where you would essentially have your own established sense of feeling at home, you're actually taking that, borrowing that, stealing that from your parents. So if they're not giving that to you, you're essentially then going out without that specific,
a baby knows, a baby knows when they're nurtured and loved and cared for. I never had that experience. I can't remember one time I felt that way as a child or even as a young adult or until I learned to create that feeling for myself. And a lot of parents love their kids, but they don't have time for them. And no one teaches us, you might have to do that for yourself. We're just kind of flopping around in the world trying to find a way to feel the way we think other people feel, but we don't know because we've never felt that way. It's learning to love ourselves is the most important, hardest, and biggest job any of us will ever have this lifetime. Learning to make peace with our past, just be okay with it. We don't have to condone it, but we do need to make peace with our past. Anything we're in resistance to will keep coming back to haunt us. Anything. I think.
Yeah. I mean, I know for me, my mom told me constantly how much she loved me, but the verbal message and the nonverbal messages were different, right? The nonverbal message was, I love you when you're acting the way I want you to, when you're making my life easier, when you're performing, when you're achieving, right? And she wasn't doing that purposely. She wasn't doing that consciously, but I mean, what does that lead to, right? That leads to then me continuing to perform
to be loved.
Right.
Also, I got to say, I'm 49, and a therapist and have a 2.5-year-old. And I can't even imagine being, 19, 20, 25, having a baby, and having broke and being worried financially, like
trauma that we haven't worked
through. I'm barely holding on. I'm 49 with an education.
I know, all the normal everyday trauma, especially over the last 7 years, has been so intense. There's been so much cultural trauma going on every day in our world that to keep ourselves at peace and calm and feeling safe and at home in ourselves, I think should be each of our biggest jobs. Because when we do that, then we can help other people learn how to do that. And can you just imagine a world where everyone felt peaceful and calm and loved? I mean, I can't really, but it would be nice.
I know, right? dream world. Would you say then, because this is something I also talk a lot about, would you say that culturally, and I don't know, maybe past versus present versus future, but I like to look at it that culturally, I think we're a codependent society. I actually think it's bigger than just on the individual level. I mean, I think that we are taught from a very young age that love looks, feels, sounds like what we might define as codependent.
The Disney movies, the Disney
right.
movie version of love, or the current popular series version of love, which has
right.
almost nothing to do with love, or very little at any rate. I think many of us expect way too much from our relationships.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No one can ever make us happy. That's our job. Mm-hmm. We're never going to be any happier in a relationship than we can be not in a relationship, than we can be on our own. We take ourselves there, and so if we're not happy, we're going to get into an unhappy relationship. It's not really rocket
pushing
science.
Back on that, even though I agree.
Yeah, what's interesting is you just said something really powerful, that we're never going to be happier in a relationship until we're happy with ourselves. Mm-hmm. But I think we're programmed and wired to believe that we're not going to be fully happy until we find the one, mm-hmm. Prince Charming, the princess, whatever. And so I know a lot of people who are successful, but they're not happy because they haven't found their partner. Mm-hmm. And so they go through life very kind of lukewarm and searching. And then when they find their partner, what they're bringing to the table is not like this whole kind of person. And then that ripples into the relationship not having legs.
What they're bringing is a lot of expectations and weight for that person to be that missing link, right? Like that's a lot of pressure to be like, well, I haven't been happy until I met you. So now you go do that. Make me happy.
Yeah. Now you're my source of happiness. Yeah. That's a big job for anyone. And we really can't.
How did you start to build your relationship with yourself? So speaking
what does that look like?
Yeah. What did that look like for you back then?
Well, taking into account normal dementia, I can't really remember one thing because it's been quite a few years ago. It meant starting with my point of pain, just like I said before. The problem wasn't being married to an alcoholic. The problem was I felt I had to stay married to my husband because God could never love me, and I would be a total failure if I divorced him with 2 kids. Mm. And so I had to extricate myself from that relationship. And then it got fun. I mean, my career took off. My happiest time was the 3 to 5 years in Stillwater when I was writing and the book was taking off and I was raising the kids. And then my son died in a ski accident. So, I mean, we're here on this great journey. And I think sometimes we expect it just to be like perfect or very good. And we get really upset when it's not. But very few people have those types of journeys that I've found. I know I haven't. It's been a lot of ups and a lot of downs.
Yeah.
None of it's promised, right? I mean, we expect that,
and to love myself.
It should be owed to us.
But what I'm not doing anymore is turning on myself when I'm down. That's one of our favorite tricks as codependents. When something bad happens, something that we didn't want to happen, something that we don't really know how to explain, we will turn on ourselves in a heartbeat. Mm-hmm. And that's not helpful for self-love. It's just not. We need to learn what it means to have true compassion for ourselves and to not judge ourselves and to be able to calm ourselves or to soothe ourselves when we get nervous, and essentially to solve our problems. We're not babies, although we have a strong inner child, but to know how we can do this dance of life with our feelings, with the complexity of life, with all the crazies out there now, and that we can get through each moment. We can get through each feeling. We can get through each disruption without turning on ourselves. And we can learn to make destiny-friendly decisions and not go around crash bombing through life. Um,
Destiny friendly decisions.
Do you
that
feel that as a writer, as an artist, as you are writing not only this book but all of your books, do you almost feel like this, almost like a possession, something greater working through you to be a catalyst and a conduit, a prism to so many people using writing as a tool?
writing is so
Or
magical
is it
for
you
me.
hate it and you're just staring at a blank page and it's like, grinding?
No, my daughter says she loves to have written, but I really, I
It's a good
really
way to put it.
relish.
I'm with your daughter.
I really relish the actual act of writing. I mean, I go into but I don't write every day. I only write when I have something to say.
Mm.
And it's usually pretty focused. But I consider it a very magical art.
Yeah, I feel the same way. It's not easy, and there are days that you're staring at a blank screen. But a lot of times, when I'm writing, as opposed to say if I'm doing videos or other things, I almost feel like there's something running through me that's spiritual, and I just kind of let myself go, get out of my own way, and then
Share the light.
because I don't even remember writing books, and you probably don't even remember writing that book. It just came out.
I remember moments. You know what? When I did this redo on this upgrade on Codependent No More, thought, how am I going to go into this book and get back to the mindset I was in when I wrote the existing chapter 21, break it up and make it look seamless? And then I remembered when I was writing it, and I thought, no, when I got to chapter 21 back in 85, 86, I just had this feeling in my soul that there was something missing in there, something else. But I didn't know what it was because I didn't know about the trauma in my own life yet. I had no idea. So I did the best I could. I wrote what is now chapter 21. But when I went to do this redo, I almost traveled back in time, and I was able just to slide into that mindset. It's a magical process. I think writers are the luckiest and most tortured people in the world. I do.
Yeah, tortured for sure. So let's talk about your new book. I mean, this is a reason why you're here today. What is different about it? It seems like one of the big things that's different is when you're with your first book, it was more through the lens of addiction or alcoholism,
Yes.
and now it's less that, or right?
Well, it's less that, and it's more Aquarian.
Yeah.
Because many of these changes we are going through are about entering into the age of Aquarius. So my editor and I went through every word in the original book. I didn't want to diagnose people with their diagnosis, like not calling people alcoholics, calling them people struggling with alcoholism, people struggling with whatever they're struggling with. I made it more inclusive. There's new stories in the book. I mean, I wrote that in 1986. It was like looking at my high school yearbook. I did that same kind of cringing because even our vernacular, the things I described as goals, common goals we might have, some of them were very cringy. Like maybe your goal
indicative,
is
right? I'm sure where you were at your life.
Yeah. So it was just a thorough combing of this book and making it more fit to enter the age of Aquarius. Also, some of my key triggers, I had really protected them in this book because, one, I didn't want to get sued. Two, Al-Anon says, we can tell our story, but we can't tell other people's stories. Sometimes telling your story in isolation, though, gets a little bit weird.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but all those people are now deceased. So I don't believe in speaking ill of the dead, but I felt more freedom to tell the truth in situations where I didn't really have that freedom back then. My greatest pride and joy is the chapter on trauma and anxiety in this book. It is. it is. I think I'm going to call it my favorite chapter I've ever written.
Mm-hmm.
I just finished it actually a little while ago. It's powerful because you can tell it's you, your tone, the way that you speak, it's very you, but it does feel, I don't want to say bigger than the rest of the book, but it feels different. It feels like it comes from like not just you, the earthly person, but it feels like it's a little bit more of a channel.
Yeah. And by then, too, I had another 36 years experience as a writer. But it's more than that. There's something as magical about that chapter as there is magical about Language of Letting Go, because that was the last book I wrote before my son passed. And that book just, I'd write something and I'd go, where did that come from?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that chapter is magical. I think it is. It's a special chapter.
We have some questions from the audience, and I want to be respectful for your time. But I put on social media that we are having you on today, and so I thought maybe the audience can ask you a few questions. And so and we won't go to too many, but here's some. Someone says, "What's the best way to break the cycle when it comes to codependency?"
It's not one way.
I don't know if it's as much a pinpoint as it is a process.
Mm-hmm.
Because until we feel an action in our guts and our souls and our heart, we're not going to be able to take that action. And recovery is about taking a lot of actions a little bit differently than we took them in the past.
Yeah.
What about this question? How do I stop? This is a really important one. How do I stop beating myself up for being too codependent? So the word codependency now, has stigma around it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we toss that around a lot. And so a lot of people, when they feel that they're being codependent or they can't say no or set boundaries, then there's this like self-bashing or beating themselves up for being codependent. So how do I stop?
I know I've spent a lot of years doing that on myself. It's like, oh, great. My goal wasn't to be the queen of the codependence, was it? And just like, but being codependent isn't a disease. It's a human reaction to life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a gateway to many of us, sometimes for the first time, having the freedom to discover who we really are. How do I really feel? What do I really want? What would it mean if I felt loved right now? What would I have to do for myself to feel loved, to feel accepted? Let myself feel a feeling, maybe stop beating up on myself. What would it take for me to feel nurtured and loved in my relationship with myself right now?
Mm-hmm.
And that can be difficult in the beginning, sorting that out.
Well, also, no one teaches us. It's nothing we learn, so it's very abstract. And even now today, when I think about self-love, what do I need? I don't have fast answers. I sit with it. I don't know what. I'm very unsure of what that looks like, and I think many struggle with that.
Well,
it's easy
what
to
are
say,
all the things we want our partner to do for us that we aren't doing that would make us feel loved and cozy? And can we pick up the slack? It just, it starts with talking nicely to ourselves.
Being kind to yourself, yeah.
Many of us just talk so dastardly to ourselves.
Sure.
I mean, I do. I would never talk to another human the way I talk to myself. Yeah. But we need to go in a little bit deeper and pick up these threads, because until we know what we're doing, we can't stop doing it, can we?
Right.
Yeah, I think the idea of needs and your partner is interesting. John and I have, in our own relationship, we've been having, I mean, every couple does, but recently we've been having a lot of conversations around what that is, right? Needs. Like, I have needs, you have needs. Like, how much of these needs is your responsibility to meet versus how much of these needs is my responsibility to meet, right? And I mean, those needs can kind of permeate all areas of your life, but I feel like clients also struggle with this in their relationships. And like you said, there's no kind of right or wrong, or like you said, John, easy answer to it. But the fact that we're even having this dialogue, I think is obviously very different than, say, relationships 20, 30 years ago. But I guess I'd be curious to know your take on somebody saying to you, how do I know what's my responsibility, and how do I know what I should, quote unquote, be asking for from my partner?
Well, it's different in every case. And we have to start by writing down what we feel are our responsibilities
Mm-hmm.
and what we feel are our partner's responsibilities.
Mm.
And then, like any good writer, kind of letting that cool and taking a second look at it. I don't know. I've never met anyone, not yet, that wants to hold me and nurture me and talk sweet to me every time I'm upset. Because usually other people are very busy living their own lives and they don't want to have to, pat me on the head every time I get upset. Sometimes it's the little things that can make us feel much more self-loved.
Yeah.
And take maybe a big load off our partner or a lot of resentments off our partner. Half of the time when I'm resentful, it's because I'm treating myself badly. I'm volunteering again to do something I don't want to do. We need to get into integrity with our own relationship with ourselves, with our heart, what we really want. We need to stop, oh, for the love of God, stop saying yes when the answer is no.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to explain. We can just say no.
Yeah.
We can stop making unfriendly decisions. We can start being aware of when we make a choice that sabotages us. Am I teaching my new neighbor? Am I teaching my child that I'll be responsible for them and they don't have to be responsible for themselves? What are we teaching? What are we saying with our own behaviors? How much respect and love do we have for ourselves that's coming through in our everyday, ordinary relationships? I think one of the worst things I saw after Codependent No More came out was when people interpreted it as, oh, it's all about me now. It's all about me now. It's not narcissism. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a gentle, humble self-love.
Yeah.
A quiet self-love.
Oh, I like that. Gentle, humble self-love. Yeah.
Yeah. I also would say too, one of the things that I feel like I've kind of connected the dots on is how codependency, I mean, this is how I describe it, but I see codependency in relationships, or maybe codependent personalities, I guess is a better way to put it, as almost the other side of the narcissistic coin. And what I mean by that when I tell people this is both are other-oriented personalities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Both are kind of trying to fill this void that they have internally with other people. Or without things outside of themselves, right? And so it makes sense that in many ways they tend to be very attracted to each other. I mean, the number of times people come to me and they're like, I keep attracting narcissists. And I'm like, well, we should probably do some work on your codependency, But I have found so many similarities in that personality structure. And look, obviously the motivation behind the behaviors is different. I'm not saying codependents are narcissists. I mean, we all are to a certain extent, but I do find that there's a lot of similarities. And if we look at it like that, it can help us kind of take ownership and responsibility a bit more.
Yeah, I've also noticed that most people I would like silently judge as narcissists are people who, if I back up a little, seem really scared and not all that sure of themselves.
Yeah.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's like a lot of bluster. Narcissism is a lot of other focus. It's just a lot of bluster.
Bluster's a really good word for it. It's like, let me do all this distracting over here so that you don't see that inside I'm actually like this little child.
I'm really scared and I don't trust anything I say or do. Yeah. It's
I've never heard the word bluster. I don't even know what that means.
Bluster means like big wind, like a windstorm, like a
okay.
Bluster.
Yeah, I would say a lot of tap dancing.
Yeah, tap dancing is good.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
and I gotta say, I want to give credit to all your books. I know the Codependent No More has blown up. What is that? What is that like for an author when one book just becomes this mega hit? Does that put pressure on you to like? Do you put a lot of pressure on you to now compete with yourself as your writer, or do you?
No, I've written some books where I'd say right out, this is a quiet book. It's not going to have a huge audience. It's for someone that wants to go a little bit deeper. I usually set my intentions with each book. I wanted Codependent No More to be written and read to make therapists' lives easier. It's like, read this book and then we'll talk.
To put language to things, yeah.
So
Well, it worked.
Yeah.
You
it
accomplished
did. It
it.
did.
Yeah.
It did. It did.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much
you're
for.
a gem. I mean, I have to say again, I'm not trying to fangirl out, but I hope you know deep down how influential you've been for so many people, and how great your impact has been. And you've changed a lot of lives, and I mean mine personally too. But you've had a really big impact, and we just hope you realize that.
Also,
Thank you.
why not fangirl out?
I know. Okay,
That
so
is
I am fangirling out.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
both absolutely lovely, both of you.
What is next for you?
I've got. I'm going to do a workbook about Codependent No More. I'm going to do a hands-on workbook that will kind of guide people through some of these in-depth purges.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've got a new book I want to write.
Nice.
For
Well,
2023.
5 years, buckle down, right?
No, I've been hearing this book and carrying it around for 5 years. It's all I can do not to make reference to it in my interviews, but I'm very excited about writing it. But I was very excited about Codependent. Well,
awesome. And where can people find you?
they can't.
That's you know what?
That's the best boundary answer I've ever heard.
Yeah, that means that's proof that you're not codependent anymore. You being off of social and not letting people know where you are is proof that you have actually come out the other
Done
side.
the work.
Yeah.
I have a web team that makes little bits about me, and I guess they're working on my website now. I'm actually trying to learn how to make TikToks, but a different kind. I have some animal stories I want to tell about my own rabbit, about a penguin I recently met. But I don't want them to be crazy. I want them to be cute, little heartfelt stories. And it's very hard to find someplace you can learn to and then tell those kind of stories on social media. So that's my next.
Oh my God, I love this. I'll be watching and following along and sharing
the penguins are cuter than they're made out to be. They are.
I think penguins are cute, so I agree with you.
Cutest animal in the world. And I have a rabbit. I have a long-haired rabbit, Doug. That's my pet. And
Doug. I love that his name's Doug.
It's a her. It's a she.
Oh, she.
And that's part of this story. She was found in a community garden, and the woman that found her thought she was a he until she took her to the doctor. Yeah. So I want to bring maybe a little more heart to some of these media things in my own storytelling. That's all.
Oh, I love it.
I love it. Thank you. And we're all excited and anticipating what you do next in your next book. And we'll definitely pick up your workbook as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for being here.
Blessings on both your careers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Yeah, I need to learn more about this life coaching because I think I've been a little